3 days after their dream wedding, Jake's world shatters when his new bride, Sophia, ditches their honeymoon for a spiritual quest with her ex. 2 years later, she's back, pregnant and alone, begging Jake to raise her child. What happens when betrayal meets a man who's rebuilt his life from the ashes? Buckle up for a story of heartbreak, resilience, and sweet, legal revenge. Jake Martinez leaned over his laptop in the small apartment he shared with his new wife, Sofia Alvarez, in Austin, Texas. The screen glowed with the itinerary for their Caribbean cruise, a week of turquoise waters and sandy beaches he'd spent months planning. At 28, Jake was a mechanic with a knack for fixing anything with an engine, his calloused hands proof of years spent tinkering in garages. His steady nature had won Sophia's heart in college, and their courthouse wedding 3 days ago had sealed their promise to build a life together. Family had filled the room with cheers, toasting their future with plastic cups of sparkling cider. Now, as Jake finalized the cruise details, he imagined them snorkeling in Cozumel, Sophia's laughter mixing with the sound of waves. The front door clicked open, and Sophia stepped inside, her steps hesitant. Jake glanced up, expecting her usual excitement about their trip. Instead, her posture was rigid, like someone bracing for impact. "Jake, we need to talk," she said, settling onto the couch with her legs crossed, a habit that usually signaled she'd been mulling something over for days. He saved the itinerary and turned his chair to face her, his easy grin fading as he caught the distance in her eyes. "What's up? Something wrong with the packing list?" Sophia took a deep breath, her fingers twisting the hem of her sleeve. "I can't go on the honeymoon," she announced, her voice steady but her gaze fixed on the floor. "There's something I need to do first, something bigger than us." Jake blinked, the words hitting like a misfired piston. They'd been married 72 hours, vows still fresh, rings still shiny, and she was canceling their dream trip. "What do you mean, something?" he asked, his tone calm, but his gut tightening. "I'm leaving tomorrow for a meditation retreat in Colorado," she said, finally meeting his eyes with a resolve that felt like a stranger's. "It's a spiritual intensive with Diego." The name landed like a wrench on concrete. Diego, her college ex, the guy who'd introduced her to yoga and mindfulness before vanishing to chase enlightenment in random retreats. Lately, his texts had been pinging Sophia's phone, filled with talk of soul expansion and authentic paths. Jake had brushed it off as nostalgic chatter, but now it felt like a betrayal taking shape. "Diego, your ex?" Jake's voice stayed even, though his mind raced. "You're ditching our honeymoon to go to some retreat with him?" Sophia nodded, unfazed by the absurdity. "It's not about him, Jake. It's about me finding who I am before I can truly be your wife. The wedding made me realize I've been living for everyone else. Family, society, expectations. This retreat is my chance to break free, to discover my true self." Jake leaned back, the weight of her words sinking in. They'd stood before a judge, promised forever, and now she was unraveling it all for a vague quest with a guy who'd already left her once. "We just got married, Sophia. We planned a life, together. And now you're saying you need to find yourself with your ex?" His voice cracked slightly, betraying the hurt he was trying to contain. "It's not about leaving you," she said, reaching for his hand. Her touch felt more like an apology than reassurance. "It's about becoming the partner you deserve. Diego and I share this deep connection, something unresolved from years ago. The retreat leader says it's blocking my spiritual growth. I need to explore it to move forward." Jake pulled his hand away, the sting of her logic cutting deeper than her departure. She'd framed abandoning their marriage as some noble pursuit, as if their vows were a minor obstacle to her enlightenment. "How long is this retreat?" he asked, already dreading the answer. 6 months, maybe more," she replied, her tone airy, like she was discussing a weekend getaway. "It depends on how the journey unfolds. I can't put a timeline on my soul's work." Jake stood, walking to the window overlooking their quiet East Austin street. Outside, neighbors mowed lawns and kids rode bikes, normal life continuing while his unraveled. 6 months, minimum, with no end date, while Sophia chased a connection with another man. He turned back, his voice low. "You're serious about this? 3 days into our marriage, you're choosing Diego over us?" "It's not choosing him," she insisted, standing now, her hands gesturing wildly. "It's about honoring my truth. The wedding showed me I've been suppressing my real desires to fit into a conventional box. Diego helped me see that marriage might be holding me back from my full potential." The words hit like a slap, her reasoning a tangled mix of self-discovery and betrayal. Jake's jaw tightened. The woman he'd married, who'd laughed with him over late-night tacos and planned a future, was now a stranger spouting buzzwords about authenticity. That night, Sophia packed with purpose, filling a duffel bag with yoga mats, journals, and incense sticks. Jake sat at the kitchen table, nursing a coffee, watching their marriage dissolve in real time. She moved through their bedroom like she was prepping for a vacation, leaving behind practical items, her work laptop, winter boots, as if shedding responsibility itself. "I'll call you from the retreat," she said, zipping her bag. "We'll stay connected through this." Jake didn't respond, his silence louder than any argument. The next morning, a rattling Volkswagen van pulled up outside, its bumper plastered with stickers about mindfulness and cosmic energy. Diego, with his messy ponytail and calculated calm, waved at Sophia like they were old friends off to a festival. She kissed Jake's cheek, a hollow gesture, and climbed into the van without a backward glance. Jake stood at the window, the quiet of their apartment deafening. The life they'd planned was gone, replaced by the hum of Diego's engine fading down the street. Jake didn't collapse. Instead, he acted. That afternoon, he found the engagement ring, a $4,000 solitaire he'd saved for months to buy, on the bathroom counter with a note. "I can't carry this energy forward." The ring, a symbol of his commitment, now felt like a relic of his mistake. He drove to a jeweler in downtown Austin, sold it for $2,500, and headed to a homeless shelter he'd volunteered at years ago. There, he met Elena, a coordinator who pointed him to Maria and Luis, a young couple living in their car with a newborn. Jake handed them the cash, no strings attached, along with a list of housing resources he'd looked up. "Use it to start over," he said. Maria's tears and Luis's stunned gratitude made the moment real, turning Jake's pain into something meaningful. Back at the apartment, Jake packed his own bags, not for a retreat, but for a new beginning. He signed a lease on a raw, industrial loft in East Austin's Arts District, a space with concrete floors and big windows that screamed potential. The betrayal still stung, but Jake was done waiting for Sophia's journey to end. He had his own life to rebuild, and he'd do it his way, wrench in hand, purpose in heart. Jake Martinez threw himself into his new life in East Austin's Arts District, where the hum of creativity and grit matched his resolve. The loft he'd leased was a blank slate, its bare walls and concrete floors a stark contrast to the cozy apartment he'd shared with Sophia. He didn't linger on the past. Instead, he focused on what he could control, building something new. His first move was to clear out the remnants of his old life. Sophia's abandoned belongings, cookbooks, office supplies, a forgotten scarf, went to local charities. Each donation felt like shedding weight, freeing Jake to redefine himself on his own terms. His next step was a bold one. Jake had always loved motorcycles, their engines a puzzle of precision and power that fascinated him since he was a kid tinkering with his dad's old dirt bike. Sophia had scoffed at his interest, calling it a phase he'd outgrow. Now, with no one to dismiss his passions, Jake scoured online listings and found a 1978 Yamaha XS650, a rusted relic sitting in a San Antonio junkyard. He paid $800, had it towed to the loft's detached garage, and stared at the heap of corroded parts. It was a mess, leaking oil, missing half its wiring. But to Jake, it was a challenge, a chance to create something whole from something broken. The garage became his sanctuary. Jake invested in a proper workbench, a set of high-quality tools, and a stack of manuals thicker than his college textbooks. Nights after his day job at an auto shop, he pored over YouTube tutorials, learning to rebuild carburetors and troubleshoot electrical systems. The Yamaha demanded patience, each bolt and gasket a lesson in persistence. When he struggled with the fuel system, cursing a stubborn valve, his neighbor Rosa Garcia stepped in. A 68-year-old retired machinist with a sharp eye and sharper wit, Rosa had spent decades fixing heavy machinery. "You're fighting the bike," she said, peering over his shoulder. "Work with it. Every part has a purpose. Respect that, and it'll come together." Her advice was practical, grounded in years of experience, and Jake soaked it up. Under Rosa's guidance, Jake learned to approach the restoration with discipline. She showed him how to measure tolerances with a micrometer, clean rust without damaging metal, and source rare parts from specialty suppliers. Their sessions turned into a mentorship, Rosa sharing stories of her career, while Jake rebuilt the Yamaha's engine piece by piece. The work consumed him, pushing Sophia's betrayal to the back of his mind. Each small victory, replacing a seized piston, rewiring the ignition, built his confidence. The garage, once a dusty storage space, transformed into a workshop buzzing with purpose. Word spread in Austin's tight-knit motorcycle community. A local rider, impressed by Jake's progress on the Yamaha, asked him to tune up a 1982 Honda CB450. Jake took the job, charging a modest fee, and delivered a bike that ran smoother than it had in decades. The client's praise led to more requests: carburetor cleanings, brake overhauls, even a full restoration of a 1970 Triumph Bonneville. Jake's side hustle grew, his reputation spreading through biker meetups and online forums. By the 6-month mark, his garage was stacked with projects, and he was earning enough to consider quitting his day job. Jake's life wasn't just about work. He adopted a German shepherd named Max from a local shelter, a 2-year-old bundle of energy, surrendered for being too much to handle. Max became his shadow, sprawling on a blanket in the garage while Jake worked, his ears perking up at the sound of a torque wrench or a delivery truck. Their daily walks through the arts district introduced Jake to a new crowd: dog owners, artists, and small business owners who valued straightforward connections over lofty ideals. At a neighborhood park, he met Carlos, a barista who ran a coffee truck, and Mia, a muralist who painted vibrant scenes on local buildings. They swapped stories about their crafts, forming a loose community that felt more genuine than the life Jake had once shared with Sophia. The Yamaha roared to life after 4 months of relentless effort, its engine purring with a deep, satisfying rumble. Jake took it for a test ride through Austin's backroads, the wind whipping past as the bike responded perfectly to his touch. The moment wasn't just about the motorcycle. It was proof he could rebuild something broken, including himself. Rosa clapped him on the back when he returned, her grin wide. "Told you, kid. Patience and precision. Now you're a mechanic, not just a guy with tools." Jake's success with the Yamaha sparked a bigger idea. He quit his auto shop job and poured his savings into turning the garage into a full-fledged custom bike shop. He named it Iron Pulse Customs, a nod to the heartbeat of the machines he loved. Clients came from as far as Houston, drawn by Jake's knack for blending vintage aesthetics with modern performance. He started a website, posting photos of restored bikes and sharing tips on maintenance, which caught the eye of a local community college. They offered him a gig teaching evening classes on motorcycle repair, recognizing his skill and ability to explain complex mechanics in simple terms. Teaching brought unexpected fulfillment. Jake's students, ranging from teens dreaming of automotive careers to retirees chasing new hobbies, hung on his every word as he demonstrated how to adjust valves or balance wheels. "It's not about rushing to the finish line," he told them, holding up a perfectly gapped spark plug. "Do the small stuff right, and the big stuff falls into place." The classroom became another space where Jake thrived, his confidence rooted in hard-earned expertise rather than anyone else's approval. Meanwhile, Sophia's absence left a quiet void, but Jake refused to dwell on it. He blocked her on all platforms, ignoring texts from mutual friends who tried to update him on her spiritual journey. Curiosity about her life felt like a trap, and Jake had no interest in revisiting the pain. His world was full: Max's loyal companionship, Rose's sharp advice, a growing business, and a community that valued his work. The betrayal that had once gutted him was now just a chapter he'd closed, replaced by a life he was building with his own hands. But cracks in that resolve appeared 9 months after Sophia left. Anonymous emails began landing in Jake's business inbox, their subject lines vague: "Please respond," or "Important message." The writing style, heavy with phrases about cosmic alignment and soul lessons, was unmistakably Sophia's. Jake deleted them without reading, setting up a filter to send them straight to spam. Then came a call from Sophia's brother, Mateo, during a busy afternoon at the shop. "Jake, I know you're done with her, but Sophia's not okay," Mateo said, his voice tense. "She's bouncing between these weird spiritual groups, and she's broke. She keeps talking about you, saying you're part of her destiny. It's freaking us out." Jake paused, a wrench in hand, Max watching him from the corner. "Mateo, she made her choice. I'm not her safety net anymore." He hung up, documenting the call for his lawyer, a precaution he'd learned to take. Sophia's shadow was creeping back, but Jake was determined to keep his life his own. Jake Martinez's life in East Austin had settled into a rhythm of purpose and precision. His custom bike shop, Iron Pulse Customs, was thriving, with a 6-month waiting list for restorations that blended vintage style with modern reliability. His German shepherd, Max, greeted clients with a wagging tail, and his evening classes at the community college drew eager students learning to rebuild engines under his steady guidance. The betrayal that had shattered him 2 years ago was a distant memory, replaced by a life he'd forged through skill and determination. But on a chilly November evening, as Jake tightened the bolts on a 1974 Norton Commando, Max's sharp bark cut through the hum of his workshop, signaling an unexpected visitor. Through the security monitor, Jake saw a figure at his loft's door, bundled in an oversized coat and clutching a worn backpack. It took a moment to register. Sofia Alvarez, 7 months pregnant, standing in the glow of the streetlight. Her arrival wasn't just a surprise. It was a disruption, threatening the peace he'd built. Jake opened the door, keeping the chain locked and Max at his side, his voice calm but firm. "Sofia, why are you here?" Her eyes darted past him, scanning the loft's open space filled with motorcycle parts and tools, a stark contrast to the life they'd once shared. "I need to talk, Jake," she said, her voice low, almost swallowed by the wind. "Diego's gone. Things fell apart, and I've got nowhere else to go." She shifted, the weight of her pregnancy evident, her hands gripping the backpack like a lifeline. Jake's mind raced, calculating how to handle this without letting her chaos derail his progress. "What happened?" he asked, not inviting her in, but keeping the conversation at the threshold. Sofia's story spilled out in fragments. Diego, her ex, had convinced her their spiritual partnership was destined to transform lives through a meditation center in Colorado. She'd poured her savings, $12,000, into their venture, believing it would lead to enlightenment. But Diego vanished after she told him about the pregnancy, taking the donated funds and leaving her stranded at a commune with unpaid bills. For months, she'd bounced between shelters and friends' couches, her dreams of spiritual awakening replaced by the harsh reality of survival. "I was wrong, Jake," she said, her voice breaking. "I thought I was chasing truth, but it was all lies. You were the real thing, and I need you now, for me, for this baby." Jake's jaw tightened. The audacity of her request, to step in as a father to another man's child after she'd abandoned their marriage, stirred a mix of disbelief and resolve. He reached for a file on his workbench, pulling out the thank you letter from Maria and Luis, the couple who'd used the $2,500 from Sofia's engagement ring to secure an apartment. "Read this," he said, handing it to her. "Your ring, the one you left behind because it didn't fit your energy, helped a family start over. They needed it. You chose something else." Sofia scanned the letter, her hands trembling as she read about the couple's new home and their daughter's nursery. "You gave it away?" she whispered, shock lacing her words. "It was ours, Jake." He shook his head. "It was mine, my savings, my commitment. You walked away from it, just like you walked away from us. I turned it into something good for people who were fighting to survive, not chasing fantasies." His words were measured, not cruel, but they landed with the weight of truth. Sofia's eyes welled up, but Jake felt no urge to comfort her. He'd spent 2 years rebuilding, and her tears wouldn't undo that. "I know I messed up," she said, stepping closer to the door. "But this baby needs a father, and you're the most dependable person I've ever known. I'm not asking for me. I'm asking for her." The plea was desperate, but Jake saw it for what it was, an attempt to shift the consequences of her choices onto him. He crossed his arms, Max sitting alert by his side. "We've been divorced for over a year, Sofia. You made your decision when you left with Diego. I'm not your fallback plan, and I'm not responsible for fixing what you broke." Sofia's shoulders slumped, but she didn't leave. "I've learned my lesson," she insisted. "Diego used me, and those spiritual teachers just took my money. I see now what I had with you: stability, love, a future. Can't we try again?" Jake's patience thinned. Her words echoed the same self-focused reasoning she'd used to justify leaving, now repackaged as regret. He stepped back, hand on the door. "You need to go, Sofia. I've got a life here, one I built without you. I wish you well, but this conversation's over." When she lingered, pleading for just a few more minutes, Jake called the building's security, a precaution he'd learned after her family's earlier attempts to reconnect them. A guard arrived within minutes, escorting Sofia away as she protested softly, her backpack slung over her shoulder. Jake documented the encounter in a notebook his lawyer had advised him to keep, noting the date, time, and her request to avoid any legal entanglements later. Max nudged his leg, sensing the tension, and Jake scratched his ears, grounding himself in the present. Back in the workshop, he returned to the Norton Commando, adjusting the clutch with deliberate focus. The familiar clink of tools and the faint smell of engine oil steadied him. Sofia's return had rattled the edges of his calm, but it hadn't broken it. He thought of his students, who looked to him for guidance, and his clients, who trusted his craftsmanship. His life was no longer tethered to Sophia's whims or her spiritual quests. It was built on tangible results, bikes that roared to life, a dog who stayed loyal, and a community that respected his work. As he tightened the final bolt, Jake's phone buzzed with a text from Rosa, his mentor. "Heard you had a visitor. You good?" He smiled, grateful for her no-nonsense concern. "All good," he typed back. "Just another day at the shop." Rosa's reply came quick. "Keep your head on straight, kid. You've got bigger things ahead." Jake set the phone down, her words a reminder of the path he'd chosen, one defined by his own hands, not someone else's chaos. Sophia's return had tested his resolve, but it only proved how far he'd come. He wasn't going back. Jake Martinez stood firm in the life he'd built, his East Austin workshop a testament to his resilience. Iron Pulse Customs buzzed with activity. Clients from Dallas to San Antonio shipped vintage motorcycles for Jake's meticulous restorations, and his community college classes packed in students eager to master engine repair. Max, his German shepherd, lounged by the workbench, alerting Jake to deliveries with a sharp bark. The confrontation with Sophia had shaken him, but he'd held his ground, refusing to let her re-enter his world. Now, the fallout from her visit tested his boundaries as her family tried to pull him back into her chaos. A week after Sophia's unexpected appearance, her father, Carlos Alvarez, showed up at the shop during a rare quiet moment. Jake was calibrating a 1969 Kawasaki's carburetor when Max's low growl signaled a visitor. Carlos, a retired electrician with a practical streak, stood at the garage door, holding a thermos of coffee as if it were a peace offering. "Jake, I hate to bother you," he said, his voice heavy with fatigue. "But Sophia's in a bad spot, and I thought you should know." Jake set down his tools, wiping his hands on a rag, and gestured for Carlos to step inside, keeping Max close as a buffer. "She's been scammed," Carlos explained, unscrewing the thermos and pouring coffee into a spare mug. "Those spiritual gurus she followed drained her bank account, $15,000 gone on retreats and energy workshops. Now she's living in a shelter, pregnant, with no plan." Jake listened, his face neutral, as Carlos detailed Sophia's downward spiral, maxed out credit cards, eviction from a commune for unpaid rent, and a refusal to accept help from family. "She won't listen to us," Carlos said, his hands gripping the mug tightly. "But she talks about you, Jake, like you're the key to fixing everything. I'm not asking you to take her back. Just talk to her, maybe get her to see sense." Jake leaned against the workbench, the Kawasaki's gleaming chrome reflecting his resolve. "Carlos, I hear you, and I'm sorry she's struggling. But talking to her would just feed her idea that I'm her fallback. She chose her path 2 years ago, and I've moved on. I filed for divorce. It's been final for over a year, and I'm not responsible for her anymore." Carlos nodded, his shoulders sagging, but he didn't push. He left the thermos as a gesture of goodwill and walked out, leaving Jake to document the visit in his legal notebook, a habit his attorney had drilled into him for protection. Sophia's persistence didn't stop. Days later, Jake's phone lit up with a call from her sister, Elena, while he was teaching a class on ignition systems. He let it go to voicemail, focusing on his students as they practiced timing adjustments. After class, he listened to the message. "Jake, it's Elena. Sophia's obsessed with you, saying you're her sole anchor. She's not stable, and we're worried she'll show up again. Can you just meet her halfway?" Jake deleted the message, adding it to his legal log. He'd learned that engaging with Sophia's family, even out of kindness, only invited more pressure. Instead, he texted his lawyer, updating her on the situation in case Sophia's actions escalated. When Sophia returned to the shop a week later, Jake was ready. She appeared mid-morning, standing outside the garage while he worked on a 1975 BMW R90S for a Houston collector. Max barked, and Jake checked the security camera, spotting Sophia clutching the same worn backpack, her posture desperate but determined. He stepped outside, keeping the gate locked. "Sophia, I told you last time. This isn't happening," he said, his voice steady. "You need to leave," she pleaded. "I just need help getting through this. You're the only one I trust." Jake didn't waver. He called security again, and a guard escorted her away as she protested, her voice fading into the street's hum. He added the incident to his legal file, noting her refusal to respect his boundaries. The shop became Jake's refuge. He threw himself into his work, restoring bikes with a precision that earned praise from collectors nationwide. A client from Fort Worth commissioned a custom rebuild of a 1971 Ducati, paying a premium for Jake's ability to blend classic design with modern performance. His classes grew, too, with students recommending him to friends, and the college offered him a second weekly session. Teaching gave Jake a new purpose. Watching a retiree master a clutch adjustment or a teen troubleshoot a fuel line sparked a pride he hadn't expected. "It's all about the process," he told his class, holding up a perfectly tuned carburetor. "Get the details right, and the machine runs forever." Outside work, Jake's community grew stronger. He joined a local dog walking group, where Max became a favorite, chasing frisbees with other dogs in a nearby park. Conversations with fellow owners about training tips or vet recommendations grounded him in a way Sophia's abstract ideals never had. Rosa, his mentor, invited him to a vintage bike rally in the Texas Hill Country, where his restored Yamaha turned heads and landed him 2 new clients. These connections, built on shared interests and mutual respect, reinforced Jake's belief in his new life. Sophia's family made one final attempt. Her cousin, Miguel, emailed Jake, begging him to reconsider for the sake of the baby. "She's in a shelter now, starting therapy," Miguel wrote. "She's trying, but she's fixated on you. One conversation could help her move on." Jake didn't respond. He forwarded the email to his lawyer, who advised filing for a restraining order if Sophia's visits continued. The clarity of that advice solidified Jake's stance. His responsibility was to himself, his business, and the people who valued his presence, not to someone who'd discarded him. By month's end, Jake heard through a mutual acquaintance that Sophia had enrolled in a job training program at the shelter, a small step toward stability. He felt no satisfaction in her struggles, only relief that she was starting to face them without dragging him into the mess. Back at the shop, he prepped the BMW for delivery, its engine purring smoothly after weeks of careful work. Max sprawled nearby, chewing a rawhide bone, while Rosa dropped by with tacos from a nearby food truck. "You're doing all right, kid," she said, tossing Max a scrap. "Don't let the past steal your momentum." Jake nodded, biting into a taco, his focus already shifting to the next project, a 1968 Triumph waiting in the garage, ready for his hands to bring it back to life. Jake Martinez's life was a machine he'd rebuilt from the ground up, each part carefully chosen and calibrated. Iron Pulse Customs, his East Austin motorcycle shop, had become a regional name, with collectors from Houston to Santa Fe shipping him vintage bikes for his signature restorations. His community college classes overflowed with students learning to troubleshoot engines, and Max, his German Shepherd, was a local legend, greeting clients with a wagging tail. 2 years after Sophia's betrayal, Jake had turned pain into purpose, crafting a life defined by skill, community, and independence. Now, as he planned a road trip through the Texas Hill Country, he was ready to test his limits and his bikes on open roads. Jake loaded his restored 1978 Yamaha XS 650 with gear, attaching a custom sidecar he'd built for Max. The trip was more than a getaway. It was a chance to visit suppliers in Fredericksburg, scope out a motorcycle museum in San Marcos, and ride the winding roads that demanded precision from both man and machine. He packed light, tools, a tent, and Max's favorite blanket, mapping a route through limestone hills and cedar-lined valleys. The journey symbolized everything he'd earned: freedom to chart his own course, unburdened by Sophia's chaos or her family's pleas. As Jake prepped, his phone buzzed with a message from Rosa, his mentor. "Ride safe, kid. Show those hills what you're made of." He grinned, tossing Max a treat before heading to the shop to double-check the Yamaha's tuning. The engine hummed perfectly, a testament to the months he'd spent mastering its mechanics. His students had helped polish the chrome for the trip, a gesture that made Jake proud of the community he'd built. At a local coffee shop, he met Carlos, the barista from his dog walking group, who handed him a thermos of black coffee for the road. "Bring back some stories," Carlos said, fist-bumping Jake as Max barked in excitement. The road trip was exhilarating. Jake and Max cruised through rolling hills, the Yamaha responding smoothly to every curve. In Fredericksburg, he negotiated a deal with a parts supplier, securing rare gaskets for a 1972 Honda CB 750 project. At the San Marcos Museum, he studied vintage bikes, sketching ideas for his next custom build. Riding back under a wide Texas sunset, Max's ears flapping in the sidecar, Jake felt a quiet triumph. This was his life now, built on his terms, fueled by his own effort, and shared with a loyal companion who never questioned his choices. Back in Austin, Jake's business continued to grow. A client from Dallas commissioned a full restoration of a 1967 BSA Lightning, offering a deposit that let Jake upgrade his shop's lathe for custom fabrication. His classes expanded, with the college asking him to develop an advanced course on fuel injection systems. Teaching had become a passion, each lesson a chance to pass on the patience and precision Rosa had instilled in him. "Don't skip the boring stuff," he told his students, demonstrating how to measure piston clearances. That's what separates a bike that runs from one that lasts. Meanwhile, Sophia's life was taking a different turn. Through a local contact, Jake learned she'd settled into a women's shelter program, working part-time at a nonprofit that helped families find affordable housing. She'd started therapy, grappling with the consequences of her choices, abandoning her marriage, chasing empty promises, and losing everything to Diego's scams. The shelter's job training had given her a clerical role, a small but steady step toward independence. Jake felt no urge to check on her. Her path was her own, and he'd long since stopped carrying her burdens. Sophia's family stopped reaching out. Her brother, Matteo, sent a final email, thanking Jake for his restraint and apologizing for the pressure they'd put on him. "She's getting help," Matteo wrote. "She knows you're not coming back, and she's starting to accept it." Jake archived the message, relieved that Sophia was finding her own way, even if it was through hard lessons. His lawyer confirmed the restraining order paperwork was ready if needed, but Sophia's absence from his shop suggested she was respecting his boundaries at last. Jake's community rallied around him. Mia, the muralist from the dog-walking group, painted a vibrant logo for Iron Pulse Customs on the shop's exterior, drawing in curious passersby. Rosa invited him to a biker meetup in Austin's Zilker Park, where his Yamaha won an informal Best Rebuild vote from local enthusiasts. The recognition wasn't just about the bike. It was about Jake's reputation as a craftsman who delivered excellence without cutting corners. Max, ever the star, charmed the crowd, fetching a tennis ball tossed by a kid while bikers swapped stories about their rides. As winter settled over Austin, Jake reflected on the past 2 years. Sophia's betrayal had been a wrecking ball, but he'd used the debris to build something stronger. Donating her ring to Maria and Luis had turned his loss into their stability. His shop, his teaching, and his friendships were proof that living well was its own kind of justice. No revenge plots, no grudges, just a life rooted in purpose. He'd honored his values, not by tearing Sophia down, but by lifting himself and others up. One evening, Jake sat at his workbench, sketching a new sidecar design for Max, who snoozed nearby. His phone lit up with a photo from Carlos. Jake and Max on the Yamaha, speeding through the hill country, the sunset blazing behind them. "This is you, man," Carlos texted. "Keep rolling." Jake smiled, setting the sketch aside. He grabbed Max's leash for their nightly walk, stepping into the crisp Austin air. The park was alive with dog owners and joggers, a community that had embraced him without asking for anything in return. As Max bounded ahead, Jake felt the weight of his past lift completely. Sophia had faced her consequences, and Jake had found his freedom, not through anger, but through the steady, honest work of building a life he loved.